A solitary Kiowa wandered the high country when he stumbled upon an 18-year-old girl lashed to a fence. To her, he gave a name, a flame, and the first place she had ever belonged. New Mexico, 1883. That day the wind felt older than memory itself, tearing across the plateau like a wild spirit unbound. It shrieked over the mesas, shredded through brittle sage, and flung scarlet sand across the canyons until the sun was nothing more than a smoldering ember behind a curtain of dust. The sky carried no birds. The plains carried no cattle. Only the restless voice of the earth moved, heavy and ancient. Chino knelt alone atop a ridge, his body still as stone against the storm. All around lay shattered shale and twisted juniper, and before him a small fire smoldered inside a circle of stones blackened by years of use. It was not his fire. Once it had belonged to his mother, a woman who spoke to spirits beneath these skies, who sang to wind and bone in a language older than men. Chino no longer prayed, not in words. He came only to keep the flame alive, or perhaps to keep alive what the fire remembered. That was when he heard it. Strange. Off. Not the song of the storm, but thinner, sharper, like a soul fraying into nothing. He rose slowly, his eyes narrowing, listening past the gale. The wind tore at his braid, clawed his coat, but the sound came again. A broken whimper. Human. His boots carried him steady through the dust, down toward the gulch and the leaning fence that once marked the trail. The posts were rotted, jagged teeth left in the earth, save one that still stood, and to it, someone had bound a girl. Her body slumped forward, arms stretched cruelly above her head, leather straps biting deep into wrists turned gray. The dress she wore, once soft, hung in tatters, stiff with filth. Her hair was a snarl of blood and dirt. Her hands, curled and broken-nailed, showed the fight she had made to claw herself free. She could not have seen more than 18 summers. Chino paused only long enough to see her chest rise, shallow but alive. Then he moved. From the sheath at his hip, he drew a black stone blade. One hand touched her shoulder, the other sliced clean through the binding straps. She fell, but he caught her before the ground did. She weighed little more than a bundle of reeds. Her head sagged against his chest, breath burning with fever. Chino said nothing, asked nothing. He stripped off his long coat, the one lined with jaguar hide from his uncle's hunts, and wrapped her completely, fur against skin, as though he were guarding something already slipping away. Without pause, he turned back into the storm. He carried her across the rocks, into the hidden path known only to him and the wind his mother once spoke to. The gale scraped dust against his face, tried to blind him, but he moved like a man who knew every bend in the land. The girl stirred once, whimpered weakly, and then went still. By the time he reached the cave, a hollow beneath a stone ledge, veiled by cedar, the storm was breaking. Inside was silence, dry earth, an old fire pit, bones of flame resting in gray ash. Chino laid the girl on a bed of pine needles and rabbit pelts. He crouched by the coals, coaxing them with flint and steady breath until light sparked, small but certain. Heat followed. She moaned, shifting faintly. He knelt at her side, pulled away her ruined shoes, washed blood from her hands, then pressed a salve of crushed roots into her torn wrists with careful precision. She did not wake, not fully, but her fingers curled toward the fire's warmth. Chino settled beside the flame, silent, expectant of nothing. Outside, the wind softened. The fire rose slow, and in that hush, the girl's breathing steadied. But her name was not spoken, not yet. When her eyes finally opened, they were rimmed with fire and shadow, confused by the glow of the cave. She lay still, as if unsure whether she was alive or still caught inside some cruel dream. The scent of smoke and pine clung to the air. Beside her, the figure of a man sat cross-legged in silence, the flames painting his face in copper and gold. For a long while, she did not speak. She only watched him. His hair, black as obsidian, was bound in a single braid that rested over his chest. His shoulders were broad, his arms scarred with old battles. The coat he wore now was not the one he had wrapped her in. She realized that was still around her own body, heavy with warmth. When she tried to move, pain tore through her wrists, and she gasped. The man's gaze shifted, dark and calm, meeting hers. "You'll live," he said, voice even, steady as stone. Her throat burned when she tried to answer. Why did you?" Her words cracked into nothing. He leaned forward, reaching for a small clay cup near the fire. Steam rose from it, bitter-scented. He placed it in her hands with a firm gentleness. "Drink." She hesitated, eyes darting toward the cave's mouth, then back at him. But thirst clawed deeper than fear. She lifted the cup, spilling some down her chin, swallowing the warmth like it was the first thing keeping her tethered to this world. When the last drop was gone, she whispered, barely audible, "Who are you?" The man sat back, gaze fixed on the fire. "Chino," he answered. Nothing more. Silence hung heavy. Her lips parted, but no name came. He waited, realizing she had none to offer. "What's yours?" he asked. Her eyes trembled, her voice broke. I don't remember." Chino studied her for a long time, as though he could read the truth written somewhere between her scars and her silence. Finally, he picked up a piece of charcoal from the fire pit. With its edge, he drew a single line on the stone wall, sharp, black, cutting against the pale rock. "From now on," he said quietly, "you are Mara." The name seemed to hang in the air like smoke. She repeated it once under her breath, unsure if it belonged to her, then clutched the coat tighter around herself. "Mara." Her gaze flickered to him, wary but not entirely afraid. The fire cracked between them, shadows shifting, as though the world itself was considering what had just been spoken. And for the first time, she felt less like a ghost, and more like someone who had been pulled back into the realm of the living. The days that followed blurred together like smoke drifting through canyon air. Mara drifted in and out of sleep, her body fighting fever while her wrists mended under Chino's careful tending. When she woke, he was always there, never hovering, never questioning, simply present, as though carved from the stone itself. She learned his world in fragments. In the mornings, he would vanish from the cave, returning with rabbits strung across his belt or roots dug from the red earth. Sometimes he carried firewood, sometimes fresh water from a stream hidden in the cliffs. His steps were quiet, his movements sharp and deliberate, as though every action belonged to a rhythm older than words. At first, Mara spoke nothing. Fear still clung to her like a second skin. She traced the walls of the cave with her eyes, listening to the way the wind moaned outside, listening to the steady crackle of the fire inside. Chino did not press her. He seemed to understand silence the way most men understand language. But silence was not emptiness. There was meaning in the way he set food before her without looking for thanks, in the way he checked her bandages with steady, calloused hands. She noticed he never touched her except when needed. No careless brush, no lingering glance. That alone made her chest ache with something she did not recognize. One evening, after he had returned with a fresh kill, she tried to rise and help. Her legs betrayed her, trembling as though the earth itself shifted beneath her. Chino caught her elbow before she collapsed, his grip strong but brief. "You're not ready," he said simply. The words should have stung, but they didn't. Instead, Mara found herself staring at the small scar that ran across his jaw, wondering how many battles it had taken to carve such quiet strength into a man. Later that night, as they ate beside the fire, she broke the silence for the first time. "Why did you untie me?" Her voice was soft, almost drowned by the flames. Chino lifted his gaze from the meat roasting on the stick. His eyes were dark, unreadable. "Because you were alive," he said. That was reason enough. Mara turned those words over in her mind long after the fire dimmed. Alive. Reason enough. For the first time since she could remember, she clutched the coat tighter around her and allowed herself to believe it might be true. The storm had passed. The cave was quiet. And though nothing between them had been spoken beyond a handful of words, something unshakable had already begun to root itself in the silence. By the second week, the fever had left her body, though weakness still tugged at her limbs. Each day Mara tested her strength, pushing herself to sit longer, to walk a little further within the cave's shelter. Chino said nothing, only watched with the steady patience of someone who had learned long ago that endurance mattered more than speed. One morning, she stood at the cave's mouth, staring at the desert stretched before her. The land was raw and endless, ridges carved sharp as knives, sand sweeping in restless waves. A hawk wheeled overhead, its cry slicing through the silence. For the first time, she realized how far from the world she truly was. That night, when the fire painted the stone walls in flickering gold, she dared to ask, "Do you live here alone?" Cheno turned a strip of dried meat in his hands, chewing thoughtfully before answering. "Alone is not the same as lonely," he said at last. The answer struck her harder than she expected. She wanted to ask more, about his people, his past, but the words tangled in her throat. Instead, she found herself blurting the question that had haunted her since waking in his care. "Did you see them? The men who left me there?" His jaw tightened, but he shook his head. "Only you." Mara's hands clenched in her lap. A name tried to surface, but like smoke it vanished before she could grasp it. Images came instead, the scrape of rope against her skin, voices thick with laughter, the sound of hooves riding away. Shame burned hotter than the fire. Cheno noticed the tremor in her breath, the way her shoulders curled inward. His voice was low, steady. "Do not carry their cruelty like a stone. It will break you faster than hunger or thirst." Her eyes met his, startled. "You don't know what they did." "No," he admitted, gaze fixed on the flames. "But I know what surviving costs. I've paid it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was thick with unspoken truths, two lives scarred by different battles, now bound together by a fragile thread neither had chosen. Mara looked at the fire, the shadows dancing across the walls. For the first time, she allowed herself to breathe without fear that the dark would swallow her whole. The day came when Mara no longer trembled at every step. Her legs were still fragile, but her spirit was restless, pressing against the cave walls like a bird longing for flight. She watched Chino gather his bow, his knife, and a pouch of snares, and before he could leave, she spoke. "Take me with you." He studied her for a long moment, his face unreadable. The silence stretched until she thought he might refuse, but finally he nodded once. "Stay close. Do what I do." The desert air struck her like a furnace when they stepped outside, but it was freedom all the same. Sunlight spilled over the cliffs, painting the land in endless shades of red and gold. She pulled the coat tighter around her shoulders and followed his steady stride. Chino showed her where rabbit tracks curved faintly through the sand, how a bent blade of grass or a broken twig told more than eyes could see. He crouched low, brushing his fingers across the earth. "The land speaks," he said. "You must learn to listen." Mara mirrored his movements, though clumsy at first. When her foot slipped on loose stone, he caught her wrist to steady her, then released her just as quickly. The brief contact sent a strange warmth through her chest. They spent hours moving through the wilds. Cheno taught her how to set a snare, how to find water by following birds at dusk, how to tell safe routes from poison. She listened carefully, every word anchoring her more firmly to the living world. By late afternoon, they returned with 2 rabbits. Her hands trembled when she tried to skin one, but Chino guided her, his voice calm, instructive. "Do not fear the work that feeds you," he said. "Fear only forgetting what hunger feels like." That evening, when the fire crackled between them, Mara ate the meat she had helped prepare. For the first time since waking in the cave, the food filled more than her body. It fed something deeper, something she thought had been lost. She glanced at Chino across the flames. He ate in silence, as always, but his presence no longer felt like a stranger's shadow. It felt steady, safe, and though neither spoke the thought aloud, they both knew the desert was no longer carrying just one life. It was carrying 2. The days began to form a rhythm, hunting at dawn, gathering roots at dusk, resting by the fire when the desert night turned sharp with cold. Mara found herself moving in step with Cheno, her strength returning more with each sunrise. She could carry firewood now, follow faint tracks, even laugh softly when the wind tugged her hair across her face. But with every gain, the weight of memory pressed harder. Some nights she would wake gasping, her heart racing with echoes of laughter that wasn't kind, voices calling her name in ways meant to wound. In those moments, she would curl against the cave wall, pulling the coat tighter as though it could shield her from ghosts. Chino never asked what haunted her, but he noticed. One night, when her hands trembled too hard to hold the bowl of stew he'd made, he simply shifted closer and steadied it without a word. His silence was not indifference. It was patience, an unspoken vow that he would wait until she was ready. Still, Mara wanted to tell him. Some part of her ached to speak the truth out loud, to let the desert carry the burden instead of her bones. Yet each time she opened her mouth, the words burned like ash. Instead, she asked, "Have you always lived this way? Alone, I mean." Chino's eyes reflected the firelight, dark and steady. Not always. But the world takes what it wants. Sometimes all that remains is you. The simplicity of the answer hollowed her chest. She thought of the men who had left her tied and broken. She thought of the life she could barely remember before that. And she wondered if survival was all she had left too. One evening, as the sun bled across the cliffs, they heard it. A distant echo, faint but sharp. The sound of hooves. Mara froze, her breath trapped in her throat. Chino's head lifted, eyes narrowing toward the horizon. "They're still out there," she whispered. He said nothing, but the tension in his shoulders spoke enough. The desert was no longer just a place of refuge. It was a place where shadows were drawing closer, waiting for the moment to strike. The night came heavy with silence, the kind that made even the fire's crackle feel too loud. Mara sat close to the flames, every muscle wound tight. Chino had been listening since dusk, his gaze fixed on the darkness beyond the cave. She didn't need to ask what he heard. She felt it too. By midnight, the echo of hooves was no longer distant. It was here, rolling like thunder across the valley floor. Mara's chest tightened, her breath coming short and sharp. The memory she had tried to bury surged up at once. The laughter, the ropes biting her skin, the cruel voices fading as they left her behind. "They've found me," she whispered, her voice breaking. Chino rose in one slow motion, tall and steady, his hand resting on the bough at his side. "Then they will learn the desert doesn't give back what it saves." The words rooted her in place, though fear still rattled her bones. She wanted to beg him to hide, to run, but the look in his eyes told her it was already decided. He had chosen his ground, and he would not move. Shadows broke across the firelight, figures on horseback circling the cliffs above. Their laughter carried down, sharp and cruel, so achingly familiar it made Mara's stomach twist. She pressed herself against the cave wall, nails biting into her palms. One rider dismounted, his boots crunching against stone as he approached. The firelight caught his face, and Mara knew. This was one of them, the men who had left her to die. Her breath faltered. She wanted to scream, but no sound came. Chino stepped forward, his body between her and the approaching figure. He drew the bow in silence, his shadow towering against the stone. "You'll not take her again," he said, voice low, steady as iron. The rider sneered, hand drifting toward his gun. "She ain't yours to keep, stranger." The desert seemed to hold its breath. Fire popped, embers rising into the night. Mara pressed her hand against the stone wall, her heart pounding so loud she thought the earth itself might hear it. And in that moment, she knew, whatever happened next, the man who had pulled her from death was willing to face it, unflinching, for her. The standoff stretched, firelight flickering between shadows and steel. Chino's bow was drawn, the string taut with silent promise. The rider's hand twitched near his holster, his grin mocking, sure of the fear he had planted long ago. But before he could draw, the arrow flew. It cut the night like lightning, burying itself deep in the man's shoulder. His cry shattered the silence, echoing across the cliffs. The horses reared, startled, their hooves scattering dust into the fire's glow. Chaos broke loose. More riders descended, shouting, guns flashing in the night. Chino moved with a quiet fury, his arrows striking true, each motion deliberate, unshaken. Mara pressed herself against the rock, her chest heaving, every shot a reminder that death was only heartbeats away. One of the men broke from the chaos, eyes locking on her. He charged, knife in hand, his face twisted in cruel recognition. "Thought we left you for good," he snarled. Mara froze. Her body refused to move, old terror chaining her to the stone. But as the blade neared, instinct surged. Her hand closed around a broken branch near the fire. She swung with every ounce of her will, the crack of wood against bone splitting the night. The man stumbled, crashing to the ground. For the first time, it was him lying helpless and her still standing. When the dust settled, the survivors fled into the darkness, their laughter gone, replaced with fear. Only the wounded groans of the fallen echoed in the desert night. Chino lowered his bow, chest rising and falling with steady breaths. He looked back at Mara, not with pride or pity, but with something deeper, something unspoken. She dropped the branch, her hands trembling, but her eyes did not look away. For the first time since that night of betrayal, she felt the weight of fear loosen its grip. The past had come for her, but she had not broken. The fire hissed as the wind carried embers skyward. Around them, the desert stretched endless and unyielding. Mara stepped forward, standing beside Chino. Whatever lay beyond the cliffs, whatever storms the world would send, they would face it together. And the desert, which had once been her grave, now carried the faintest whisper of hope.